Heard from politicians about this Boeing deal. What are the odds of Boeing actually taking St. Louis and taking Missouri up on the offer? Vice President of the Teal Group, Richard Aboulafia, joins us to discuss it. Good morning, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Not a problem. Good morning.
All right, bottom line this for us. What are the odds? Does St. Louis have a shot at this?
Pretty unlikely.
How come?
That's the bottom line, I'm afraid.
How come?
Well, a couple reasons. One, you look at learning curves in the jetliner industry and the fact that what they've got planned here is a major derivative of an existing jet. That puts a huge premium on current skills. And not having any kind of a commercial jetliner-trained workforce definitely puts St. Louis at a disadvantage. I mean, you had some crossover from the military workers, but frankly, it's a dwindling pool by 2020, and those are really kind of different skills in any event. And then on top of that, you got geography. If you're not going to assemble the whole thing in one super site, which is a really bad idea, then you have to import structures via sea or, conceivably via rail, but it's not really clear where that would come from. So to keep the options open, the seaport is essential.
I see. So even if they built the fuselage here, how are you going to get it to the assembly plant?
Or if you built the assembly plant there, how would you get the other major structures, like wings and things, to St. Louis?
Right. So we heard yesterday that Seattle is still probably in the front running for this.
You look at all the numbers lined up, and it overwhelmingly points, just by any rational economic guide, to keeping it in the Puget Sound area. That doesn't mean rationality prevails, of course, but it certainly means they have a huge advantage.
Right. So what's Boeing's play here? Because the labor unions turned it down, Boeing got angry with them, and they said, we'll show you. We're going to take bids from other places?
That appears to be the gist of it. And it's hard to tell, of course, when people are being rational and calculating and just saying, right, get the best deals we can from all the other places and use that as leverage to get an even better deal from the folks back home, or if they're genuinely sick of dealing with that union and being in that area, which would be emotion-driven rather than economically rational.
Right, but at some point, let me put it this way, Richard. I don't think anybody here is saying St. Louis or the region's going to get all of it. Do you think they could get a portion of it, a small part of it?
The issue is that barriers to entry in major structures are almost as high as they are at the top of the food chain, which means it's going to be kind of the usual suspects who bid on major work packages. You look at Spirit up in Wichita. They've been doing this sort of thing for years. Every so often, people will build a new green facility somewhere, like Spirit or Triumph Group or GKN over in Britain could get a piece of the work and decide to put it in St. Louis. It's conceivable, but that wouldn't be directed by Boeing. That would be directed by the major subcontractor who got it. So in other words, totally different set of people to negotiate with.
Yeah. If it's not Missouri and or St. Louis, and if it's not Washington, where else could it be?
The only thing that really makes any sense to me is Charleston, South Carolina, because by then they'll have a bigger trained workforce associated with that secondary 787 line they've got there. Of course, they do have a seaport, right-to-work state, some virtues there. The problem is the labor catchment pool isn't all that big, so the more they ramp up in labor requirements, the more they have to bring people in or spend more on training or whatever.
Right. You mentioned we don't have the workforce here. We do have the military workforce here. We do have quite a bit of auto workers here who have been here, who have been laid off or working or whatever else. We also have some trade school infrastructure here where we can certainly ramp up relatively quickly to sort of train these people. Why would it be out of the realm of possibility that we just sort of pour a little more resources into that to get people up to speed?
That wouldn't be a deal killer. Obviously there's skilled workers in Missouri, but the issue is how are you relative to other people? So you look around and you say, well, there are people who are getting those exact skills they need right now in Charleston, and there are people who've been doing this all their lives, and, well, there are 50,000 of them in Washington State. And you look at other places like, for example, Salt Lake, not great geography, but they're starting to get workers who are skilled in commercial aircraft composite manufacturing, that is to say, not metal, but basically carbon fiber reinforced plastics, which a lot of the plane will be made of. And that's more of a targeted skill set that would give them something of an advantage. So it's not that St. Louis is bad, it's just that other guys have an advantage there.
And there's also a timeline issue, too, right? I mean, they want to get this started right away. So that will come into play, too.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, time cuts both ways because unfortunately, the McAir workforce is going to dwindle a bit by the time this thing enters in production. We don't really know what's happening to the F-18 and F-15 lines. They're almost certainly going to dwindle down by then.
What's if Boeing were to say, look, we got such a sweetheart deal out of St. Louis and out of Missouri. Workers in Seattle, you know what? Here's a couple of $1,000, $20,000 transfer to St. Louis, and we'll build it there.
You get some buy-in in that for sure, and that would definitely help things. But on the other hand, A, that increases your expense. B, you might not get that many because, people don't really like to move that much.
Right.
The fact that there's so much unemployment in cities like, say, Detroit shows that people don't always move despite their rational economic self-interest. So there are a lot of uncertainties with that.
Be interesting. Boeing's going to make this decision mid-January?
That's the current plan, but of course,
Right.
That's up to them.
But they have to go back to Seattle and get the unions to sign off on this, though.
Well, that's right. And there's also the problem that if they do leave, they've got all their other lines, and the labor agreements for those will be renegotiated in 2016. And moving and not talking, and that's a recipe for a strike.
Right, but also can't they say, look, we're going to, it's an idle threat now because everyone's saying they're never going to leave because the workforce is too valuable here. If Boeing leaves, that puts them in a better position for the next round of negotiations with their unions.
Not necessarily, because frankly, the local union is exactly that. They tend to comport themselves that way, and they'll simply be mad.
It's really interesting times, and a lot of people staring at each other, and I guess it's a staring contest, right, more or less, up in Seattle?
There's an awful lot of that, absolutely.
All right, Richard, you say, what, 90%, 99% chance they're going to stay in Seattle and build this plane?
Yeah, that's about right. But again, based on rational economics and business practices, and sometimes human psychology gets in the way of that.
Yeah. Is there anything else Missouri or St. Louis could do to sweeten the pot to get Boeing off of the idea of staying in Seattle?
Not really. And to be honest, we've seen this movie before with the 787, and ultimately the bulk of production was kept in the Puget Sound area, despite talking to several other site providers. Eventually, they did move a secondary line in Charleston, which they're having some troubles with. But on the other hand, I'm sure they regard that as a good idea. The smarter move might be to start now talking with potential first-tier aerostructures providers, whether it's the Italians, GKN, the Italians Finmeccanica, the GKN, the British firm Spirit up in Wichita, Triumph Group, or maybe the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries over in Japan, and say, hey, we know you're going to build a major aerostructures package. You should consider doing it in St. Louis. That might be a smarter and more likely to produce fruit result.
That is Vice President of the Teal Group, Richard Aboulafia. Richard, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us this morning. Have a good day.
You too.
7:29 here on the Big 550 KTRS. Now, granted, I'm talking to the spin doctors here in St. Louis. They're saying that the workforce in South Carolina is nowhere near up to the credible standards of the workforce here in St. Louis. We provide a better workforce. We provide better infrastructure. So we're not going to get it all, but could we get a fuselage? Could we get the seatbelts? Could we get the tires, the landing gear? The spin doctors here in St. Louis are saying we've got a really legitimate shot. So we'll see what happens.
It's interesting, though, hearing what he has to say.
It's interesting hearing the other side, yeah.
If they even throw us a bone.
Yeah, interesting. 7:30 here on the Big 550